The city of Chicago has filed a lawsuit against Grubhub and DoorDash, alleging deceptive and unfair business practices. And as Chicago public schools come back fully for the first time in more than 500 days for in-person learning, there will be familiar rites of passage and some unfamiliar ones.
In the spring, if you recall, there was 6 feet of social distancing that was strongly recommended. Now we are at 3 feet when schools can do it.
Chalk Beach Chicago Bureau Chief Cassie Walker-Burke joins me with more.
There are some questions among other districts about, can you mandate that students would report if they are vaccinated? Can you require families? And the state has left it up to individual districts to decide.
I'm Amy Guth, and this is Crane's Daily Gist for Tuesday, August 31st. When it comes to a professional like your doctor or lawyer, you want someone who knows you well. Wintrust believes you should have the same relationship with your banker, someone you can call directly and know they'll understand your concerns. Thousands of local business owners called their Wintrust banker when they needed Paycheck Protection Program loans. They called, Wintrust answered, and helped more than 11,000 local businesses secure funding. Learn more at wintrust.com/dailygist. Member FDIC. As Chicago Public Schools fully come back for in-person learning for the first time in more than 500 days, there will be familiar rites of passage and some less familiar ones. Joining me now is Cassie Walker-Burke, Bureau Chief for Chalk Beach Chicago. Cassie, thanks so much. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so some familiar COVID mitigations will be back this school year, masks and hand sanitizer, but there will be some differences. What about things like the pod system and temperature checks and social distancing? What is that going to look like this year?
There are actually quite a few differences for parents and families and students who went back in the spring for hybrid learning and what they're going to encounter now. So gone are the electronic daily screener that parents had to fill out and that often ran into problems. Also gone are temperature checks, the daily temperature screens. District officials just said they weren't a reliable metric for COVID. I think the biggest difference that I heard parents talking about today, I've been at schools all morning, is that the social distancing requirements are different. Now, this came from the federal government. In the spring, if you recall, there was 6 feet of social distancing that was strongly recommended. Now we are at 3 feet when schools can do it. And so I think that is the thing that is on the mind of many parents, especially if their children go to schools that have larger class sizes.
And what about remote options? What does that look like for now?
Well, right now, remote options are very limited. Chicago Public Schools has about 341,000 students. And if it gives you any sense of the scale of the remote options, only about 750 students are logged in or connected by Virtual Academy. And the Virtual Academy is really a remote option for students who are medically fragile and are able to show some documentation that they're at greater risk to COVID-19. I will say that this has been a real point of contention with parents groups. And one thing to note here is that the state actually said that districts could provide remote options, but they could only provide them to students who are unvaccinated and under quarantine orders. So there are some limits from the state, but there's a feeling that CPS put stronger requirements on its Virtual Academy. And some parents would have liked to see more of an option for families.
And so district officials have said that they are just all in on this reopening to in-person learning and to staying open, that they're committed to doing that. But the later rollout of some of the safety protocols has been an issue for some parents and for some educators. Where is CTU and where are parents on this right now?
It's a good question, and I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, CTU and the district have not reached an agreement. I think it's very important to just spell that out. And the union said that the teachers would come back for the first day. They're there. There was no action that was taken today. But, if there's not an agreement reached soon, could the union take action? Possibly. I think for parents, some parents, this has been also an issue for them. They felt like they didn't hear from their schools soon enough about protocols. Some parents I talked to today, interestingly enough, felt like their schools had communicated pretty clearly with them. One of the big questions that is pretty common when you talk to parents is that they want to know, when are they going to be notified? Because some COVID cases are self-reported at the school level. So when are they going to be notified? And what would happen if multiple children in a classroom came down with COVID-19. In the spring, there were clear metrics for classroom closures. Now things are a little bit up in the air. The mayor said today, no, we still have these metrics. There's still clear protocols for when we close classrooms. But we know from the ongoing conversations between the union and the district that the district has actually proposed a different scenario where it would really only send home unvaccinated students for some sort of quarantine measure, and the vaccinated students would stay in classrooms. And so there's a question mark there. And I think we don't really have a clarity yet what's going to happen.
And on that topic of vaccination, so teachers are required to be vaccinated. Kids under 12 aren't yet vaccinated. Kids 12 and older are eligible. So at this point, what percentage of CPS kids are considered fully vaccinated, and how is that being tracked?
We don't know. I think it's a very important question. It's a good question. But the bottom line is that we don't know. We know at the city level that children between the ages of 12 and 17, the vaccination rates have hovered a little bit, but I think they're in the mid 50%, so like 55, 56% at the last numbers I saw. But that number does not break down CPS students versus private school students versus archdiocese students. So we don't know with CPS exactly what percentage of students are vaccinated. And I will say at the state level, there are some questions among other districts about, can you mandate that students would report if they are vaccinated? Can you require families? And the state has left it up to individual districts to decide. But I think this is going to be a big question. I think you have to also remember that the district can't say 100% what percentage of its teachers have been vaccinated. And the city can't even say what percentage of its police force has been vaccinated. So this question of who is vaccinated and who is not, and how do you keep track, I think is going to be an ongoing one.
So going into this school year, what are the biggest challenges that are facing the different stakeholders, parents and teachers and students?
Oh, it's a list. I think that today, one of the big challenges that the district was discussing was the bus driver shortage. The district was notified on Friday that about 70 bus drivers had resigned from one of the contractors. And so they had to scramble to try to find alternative arrangements for parents. So I think just some of the basics of getting to and from school have been challenging for the district today. I think moving ahead, some of the things we'll see this week are some of the protocols around self-reported cases when parents are notified. I think we'll start to see questions about what happens if there are cases. Do classrooms close? What are we going to see individual schools do? I think down the road, the big questions are going to be more around students and how are they? What emotional sort of needs do they have after a year and a half of a pandemic, and also the layered traumas of living in a city with an uptick in gun violence? And academically, what are we going to see? What sort of learning impacts are we going to have? What's going to happen to reading and math? And what happened to students, particularly students in non-English speaking homes during this time? Are they coming back and needing additional language support? How is that support going to be provided? All I can say is, as an education reporter, it's going to be a really busy year.
I have no doubt. And what about concerns about disengagement of students maybe feeling so behind, maybe older students feeling so behind they don't return or they don't engage this year ahead?
The district had said it was worried about 100,000 students, or about 100,000 students that it was worried about this summer. And then it winnowed down that in the middle, made an aggressive outreach to those students, and that it had prioritized them in ways so they could see who were the least engaged, maybe had fallen out of touch with the district completely or fallen out of touch with their schools, who were kind of in loose contact. They said today that they have made contact with about 75% of those students, and that they're doubling down on the students they have not been able to connect with. I think it's a core group of about 18,000 students that they're most concerned about. And they said they would take stock after this week and see, really who did we not hear from? There's always transition, students going between schools, families moving in and out of the city. And so I think they want to wait and see what happens this week. And then they're going to double down on some re-engagement efforts, phone calls, emails, even home visits.
Leslie, what about budget? I feel like that has kind of been lost in the conversation with just logistics and the pandemic. Where is CPS on budget-wise right now?
Very interesting. So Chicago Public Schools usually has about a $8 to $9 billion budget, and that's including everything: capital expenditures, debt, pensions. And so this year, The budget is still along those lines, but the district is set to receive nearly $3 billion of federal emergency spending for COVID relief. And that's money that can go to anything such as PPE or for additional cleaning and janitors, to things like learning loss and trying to give schools an extra fund to hire tutors or get a new curriculum or to try to do things to address students' emotional and academic needs. And so I think that a big thing for us moving forward at Chalkbeat is, how is that money going to be spent? And is that money going to go to students? And is it going to benefit them? And in what ways? And how do we see that? Already we're seeing some of that money being used. For example, there's some additional staff that are being hired, but there are also a lot of contracts that are starting to float around with nonprofits and private groups to bring in mental health supports, for example, or additional academic supports. But how do we know at the end of the day that that money is actually being spent to benefit students? And how do we know what's working and what isn't? I think that's going to be actually one of the deeper questions that we try to follow this school year.
There's so much ahead, but we will certainly be turning to you for the latest and keeping an eye on Chalkbeat Chicago. Thanks so much, Cassie. Appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Cassie Walker-Burke is the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Chicago, a nonprofit news site covering educational change in public schools. Coming up, a new Northwestern study indicates that getting COVID-19 doesn't guarantee a high level of antibodies, which runs counter to the idea that getting COVID makes people immune to reinfection. We'll talk about that and more right after this. When change is constant, stability matters. That's the promise of forever ownership. Irvine Company's unwavering commitment to providing dynamic workplace communities to meet your evolving business needs. From Class A+ trophy buildings with marquee addresses to energizing amenities, Irvine Company's dedication to your success lasts a lifetime, now and forever. Start exploring at irvinecompanyoffice.com/gist.
This is the Crane's Daily Gist with Amy Guth.
The city of Chicago is suing delivery giants Grubhub and DoorDash, alleging what was described as deceptive and unfair business practices that the city said are damaging restaurants' reputations and misleading customers about fees and menu prices. And the city said the lawsuits are the first comprehensive legal action taken against food delivery companies in the U.S. In a statement, Illinois Restaurant Association CEO Sam Toya said he's long believed that, quote, any third party delivering restaurants' food or using their names, logos, and menus without consent is a serious issue for the industry. He continued by saying, we appreciate the city of Chicago taking action to help restaurants protect their brands and businesses. Hopefully, he said, this step will lead to all parties coming together to find a permanent resolution with guardrails in place moving forward. You can read the complaint against Grubhub in its entirety at chicagobusiness.com. Rivian Automotive, the maker of electric pickups backed by Amazon, has reportedly filed for an IPO and is seeking a roughly $80 billion valuation. That according to people familiar with the matter who spoke with Bloomberg. The Irvine, California-based startup said in a statement on Friday that it submitted its S-1 registration to the SEC. Bloomberg reported the company would like to do an IPO around the November 25th Thanksgiving holiday, though the timing will depend on approval from the SEC. A listing at the valuation that Rivian is hoping for would be one of the biggest ever market debuts for an automotive company. The company's raised $10.5 billion from backers including Amazon and Ford, established a factory in downstate Normal, and has thousands of reservation holders for its R1T truck and R1S SUV. Rivian's institutional investors include T. Rowe Price, BlackRock, Soros Fund Management, Fidelity, and others. Dow Jones reported, citing people familiar with the matter, that Deerfield-based Baxter International is in advanced talks to acquire Chicago-based Hillrom Holdings for about $10 billion. The new offer comes about a month after Hillrom rejected a $9.6 billion takeover offer from Baxter, Bloomberg News reported earlier. Hillrom saw Baxter's proposal of about $144 per share as too low, according to people with knowledge of the matter. According to its website, Hillrom makes a range of hospital equipment, including stretchers, patient monitors, operating tables, and electrocardiographs. The company's shares have climbed 36% this year, almost twice the gain of an S&P 500 index tracking healthcare companies, while Baxter has decreased 7.8%. A just-released Northwestern University study indicates that getting COVID-19 doesn't guarantee a high level of antibodies. contradicting the assumption that getting COVID makes people immune to reinfections. The study by Northwestern University researchers found that getting COVID also does not guarantee a robust antibody response to the first vaccine dose. A statement from Northwestern said that the study tested blood samples from adults who had tested positive for COVID-19 to measure how long the immunity benefits of Pfizer and Moderna vaccines last and how well they protect from newer variants. The researchers also found that 2 months after the second Pfizer or Moderna vaccination, antibody response decreased 20% in adults with prior cases of COVID-19. The statement said, quote, "The Northwestern University study underscores the importance of receiving a second dose of vaccine, not only because it is commonly known that immunity from vaccines wanes over time, but also because the risk posed by emerging variants, including the highly contagious Delta variant." And that's Crane's Daily Gist for now. Check out our continuous newsfeed at chicagobusiness.com. Special thanks to my guest today, Cassie Walker-Burke of Chalkbeat. Follow our conversations on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get audio on demand. And don't forget to rate and review Crane's Daily Gist because that's the best way for others to discover our episodes. You'll also find hashtag Crane's Daily Gist on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Our show is produced by Todd Manley at Earsight Studios. I'm Amy Guth. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll meet you right back here next time.